بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين نحمد الله حمدا يليق به عز وجل ونشكره شكرا يليق بنعمه التي لا تعد ولا تحصى والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد صلاة وسلاما ننال بها شفاعته أما بعد. يقول الله تعالى في سورة الجن وأن المساجد لله فلا تدعوا مع الله أحدا. In Surah Al-Jinn, Allah says that the masjid is for Allah, so do not call anyone besides Him. So what is the role of the masjid in our deen? What is the role of the masjid in Islam? Is it a place where you go to pray 5 times and that's it? Or does it have a larger vision? The first thing we have to understand is that in Islam, from the ahadith and from the Quran, we see that the masjid is a source of activity, is a constant source of activity, and it fulfills individual needs and communal needs. In terms of individual needs, it is a source of cleanliness. In the Quran it says, فِيهِ رِجَالٌ يُحِبُّونَ أَن يَتَطَهَّرُوا, which means inside of the masjid there are men who like to be clean, who like to clean themselves. And this is not only a physical cleanliness that we get from doing wudu, but also a spiritual and a mental cleanliness. When we go to the masjid, it should be a source of spiritual cleaning for us. If we have any faults within ourselves, within our character, or within our hearts, then going to the masjid should help us fix this. And the encouragement, or one of the encouragements that Allah gives us to go to the masjid and to participate in the masjid is the immense rewards that can be found in it. For example, if you go to the masjid to pray a fard, then you have the ajr of a hajj, a complete hajj. And if you go to the masjid to pray a sunnah, then you have the ajr of a complete umrah. And if you go to the masjid to learn something or to teach somebody else something, then you get the ajr of a complete hajj. And those are just 3 examples. There's many more examples of the ajr that can be found in a masjid. When we're sitting right now, for example, and we're learning, the malaika, the angels, are also around us. And Allah is pointing towards us and showing off to His angels, look at these people that have come to my house, that have come to my house of worship and are here to learn about me. So there are immense rewards to be found in the masjid, and this should encourage us to go to the masjid and to participate in it. And in terms of communal goodness, we will see that the role of the masjid in the time of the Prophet was not just even for Muslims. For example, there was a wafd, or a delegation from Najran, of dozens of Christians, and they went to meet the Prophet in the Medina. And where did they stay? They stayed inside the masjid, and they ate inside the masjid, and they slept inside the masjid. And if there was any business to be done, the masjid was the center of their business. Even their prayer was done inside the masjid. The Prophet allowed them to pray their Christian prayers inside of the masjid. Another example is that there was a man who was going to assassinate the Prophet. He had traveled, one of the mushrikeen, and he was going to assassinate the Prophet. So what did the Prophet do? They found him and they tied him up to a pillar inside the masjid, and they left him there inside the masjid. And the Prophet would go up to him 3 days in a row and he would say, Aslim Taslim, which means if you become Muslim, then you'll be safe. And 3 days in a row, the men would refuse. He would say, no. If you let me go, I'll owe you, but I'm not gonna say that I will become Muslim. So on the 3rd day, the Prophet said, okay, let him go. So they untie the man and he walks towards the door, and before he leaves, he turns around and he says, Ya Muhammad, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa annaka Rasulullah. O Muhammad, I bear witness that there is only one God, Allah, and you are His Prophet. So we see that even for non-Muslims, the masjid plays a role. And this is in a Muslim society. So what type of role should a masjid play in a non-Muslim society? An even bigger role for both Muslims and non-Muslims. And the reason for this is because this should be the place where we plant seeds within ourselves and strengthen our own roots and our own ideologies. The masjid should be that place. And in the Quran, Allah says, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَاكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. Which means that the type of people that we should be hanging around and that should encourage us to be around the masjid and to be inside the masjid are people who mention Allah in the morning and in the night. All they want is His face, or all they want is His reward. And we should not look towards others that are not them. And the reason for this is, if your friends or the people that you're surrounded with are good people, they're good Muslims, this is going to make it much easier for you to be a good person. And vice versa. If they're not those types of people, it's going to be much, much more difficult to go to the masjid, to pray in the masjid, to even come and have fun in the masjid, or to be around the masjid. So we should be careful about the types of people that we surround ourselves with, just like we're careful about the types of places that we go. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو التواب الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. During the battle of Badr and the battle of Uhud and many of the battles of the Prophet, he would have to plan for the battle. He would have to have a place where he called people and he asked them if any one of them would be able to donate towards that cause or towards that specific sariyah. And where would he do that? He would do that inside of the masjid. So the Prophet, one of the things he would do is he would plan for war inside of the masjid. And where did marriages occur in the Medina? They occurred inside of the masjid, right? And if anybody came to visit the Medina, where would they go? They would go to the masjid. Now, maybe we see that our specific masajid, they're not fulfilling that role as it should be. So how do we, as individuals, how do we fix that? Well, we can do that on an individual basis as well. If we're hanging out with our friends and we're outside, we can say, okay, Asr is in 30 minutes, we can get something to eat, and we can come to the masjid, we can pray Asr there. So even if we see that there are certain things that our masajid lack, or we see that they're not helping us as much as they should be, or they don't have the activities that we want, we should take our own small steps towards making the masjid a source of activity for ourselves. Even if that's something that you do on your own. You come alone, you go to the masjid to pray the fard prayers, you come with your friends, even if you're just coming out to hang out in the masjid, why not? Right? There's nothing that says you and your friends shouldn't come and hang out in the masjid and talk about school and talk about the problems that you have. We encourage this, and you should do it. So if you see anything that you would like to change, you should go ahead and try and change it with yourself, even with the smaller steps that you have, even with the small amount of power that you have. And this is something that we should all keep in mind. In a hadith, the Prophet says, if any of you sees a munkar, if any of you see something bad or something that you don't like, then change it with your hand. And if you can't change it with your hand, then try and change it with your tongue. And if you can't do either of those, then just use your heart. And that's the same philosophy that we should apply to our message. If we see something that we don't like, or if we see something that we want to take place, we go and do it ourselves first. We don't need to complain, right? Or we go and talk to the right people. And this should be our mindset in life and when we deal with our masajid. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو التواب الرحيم وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله